Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Mage, Errant, Book 6, Tongue Eater, Chapters 1 through 4. In this episode, we get started on the journey post-betrayal, which is not easy, and everybody is dealing with their intense grief in really different ways. And I just have to say that grief sucks. Sucks. It just, that's all. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Dan for commissioning this episode. What's up, Dan? Dan is here in the chat. This book, you guys, I have a feeling is going to be really hard in some ways. And what I mean by that is we are dealing with a writer here who doesn't shy away from emotional trauma as a story, like, not a source, I don't want to say it like he's exploiting something, but more like he will deal with this as a real issue in people's lives in a genuine way. And it's the kind of book where it would be very easy to expect him to go light on it, because there's adventure and there's a bit of revenge to be had, perhaps, and people to save, so you could forgive him if he decided to pull back on that. And I just feel like he's not really going to do that, because it's just not his style so far as I have seen. So I am low-key dreading things a bit, because this is so painful for everybody involved, and it's painful in a variety of ways. Some people are very directly affected, and some people it's more like blowback or just a feeling of helplessness, that they're sitting watching their friend be in pain and there's nothing they can do, and they know that. And all of this is a very real side effect of war, in a way that we talk about in a sort of an abstract sense a lot of the time. But seeing this so close up here is really, it's sad, The ending of the last book was sad. It was a huge battle, and if you say that to somebody, like, oh yeah, this YA book winds up in this massive battle on, the school grounds, you really imagine something, and what you get isn't that. And I am worried about it. So let's start things off. We are picking up pretty much exactly where we left off in the last book, which is interesting. The others, there's been a bit of a time, it's not a huge amount. Usually they start pretty soon after, but this is like, we're picking up right where we left off. The battle has just ended. There is all confusion. Nobody even knows that Kandaron is dead yet or what happened. So our friends are trying to make their way down the hall without drawing too much attention, and trying not to run when people can see them, and then like sprinting when they get by themselves. And he is feeling for the connection between him and Kandaron the whole time, which results in him not really fully paying attention to what she's saying to him. And this was something that comes up all four chapters, and I suspect it's kind of going to be a thing going onward in general, unless there is a resolution to it. But Hugh is really adamant that Kandaron isn't dead. And who could blame him, really? There's this weird sphere where she had been that feels like an essence of her and maintains like just enough of her power to feel familiar to him. And I think maybe keep up a tiny bit of the connection that he had with her. And nobody seems to know what that sphere does or is. So honestly, I'm not really faulting him for thinking she's still alive. And I am not certain she isn't. Like, it's possible that she has made some sort of like egg or seed out of the very, very bit of her that remained, and maybe that it's not like she can come back to life, but perhaps there's some sort of echo of her that remains. Forgive me if you guys can hear this. My dog is like pawing at his bed as if it's a pile of sand that he's trying to cover up his poop with. I don't know why. Anyway, this is a really weird, like, it's, I don't really know what to make of this egg. And I'm calling it that because I feel like due to the fact that she had wings, I just go to that, you know, and her child was called a hatchling. And I want partially to believe that she could come back, but there is a part of me that feels like her returning to life would be cheap. And I really can't reconcile this. It's like I want her death for the effect that it has on him to be for something. And that's not to say that if you go through the grief of losing somebody and then it turns out they're not gone, that you must have missed out on a chance to grow. I'm not exactly. It's more like I want Hugh to be able to move forward without her guidance. And if she comes back, I feel like there's a part of Hugh that would fall very easily into the rhythm they had of her being in charge of him. And I sort of want him to stand on his own feet and not have that to fall back on, you know? And it bums me out a little bit in two directions that the way that everybody reacts to Hugh saying she's not dead is this sort of pitying, oh, sweetie, like, what are we going to do about this? We're going to have this conversation with him eventually. There's a real sense of, I don't know how to get you to acknowledge the clear truth that we all see, even if you refuse to admit it. But I'm, again, not sure that they are right and he is wrong. And I really don't appreciate, in a way, the fact that they aren't granting him a little grace on this. The feeling of like of pity and like just barely controlled restraint from saying she's dead, Hugh, isn't acknowledging the fact that this weird thing is still there and asking questions about what that could mean. So I'm annoyed about the fact that they're treating his like hanging on as pure denial when it's definitely based on something that's tangible beyond simply I don't want her to be dead. There's like a physical object she's left behind that has like an energy that feels like her, and he had a connection that he can still feel, he says. And I want everybody to just respect that a little bit more. I feel like nobody is giving Hugh the credit he's due. He has never been somebody to like persist in saying something everybody else says isn't true unless it's about, I don't think my friends really like me or I'm a burden. That's about himself. So that's an exception. But this is like, you know, he is really the only person pacted to her And so the only person who, if she weren't completely dead, would be able to tell. And they're all really brushing him off, and I don't like it. It makes me feel like they don't trust his judgment. And granted, his judgment is probably compromised because of his grief. But, like, he's not just saying this out of nothing. It's not sheer wishing. So that I don't like. On the other hand, everybody, when they say Candoron's name in the past tense, or when they say Candoron died, and he keeps saying she's not dead, you know what they mean though, Hugh. Like, yeah, she may not be dead, but you get what they're saying. And for all intents and purposes at the moment, she's dead. I get that you don't believe she's really gone. But that's the easiest way to say this for the sake of, what we've got going on and the shorthand of needing to convey what we mean in planning in an emergency. It is not productive to constantly, correct people and say she's not dead when in this moment it doesn't matter. That's not the point. So I wish everybody would be a little bit more flexible with the way they are saying things and understanding things and giving some grace to things. Because it just feels like we're constantly being pulled into these moments with him arguing whether she's dead or not. And that isn't even, it's not going anywhere. The conversation isn't progressing. And if it's not going to change because you guys don't have any further evidence in either direction, just come to terms with that you each have a different idea of what has happened, and respect that, and let each other use the language that you feel comfortable with to describe the situation. Just leave it at that. So I just wanted to acknowledge that, first off, because it feels to me like this is going to be a thing that continues, and he is going to snap at somebody eventually, or somebody's going to snap at him. And I don't know how many people have seen the sphere that she left behind. I don't remember actually if it's mentioned. Dan, does he take it with him, or what happens to it? I don't remember what even happens with that. But so there's potentially, maybe Hugh doesn't even want to let anybody know that there's this weird sort of object left behind. And I would definitely understand that, because it feels like if she's still somehow around, this is certainly the most vulnerable she'll ever be, and not wanting people to be able to get a hold of this last scrap is only reasonable. So, okay, Dan says no one can move it, it's just sitting there. Right, I forgot. So, yeah, then everybody should be able to see it, so nobody else is asking the question about whether she's still alive or not. Doesn't that seem weird to you? Doesn't it seem like more people than just Hugh would kind of wonder if she were really dead based on the fact that there's this thing remaining? It just feels like everybody is really treating him like a child, and just flat out not acknowledging a very real piece of evidence in favor of his argument and position. I don't understand it, and I don't like it. It just bothers me. It's not rational, So, anyway, okay, we're gonna move past that. So he is running down the hall again. He is with Sabe at this point. It's just the two of them. And the spellbook is blocking scrying. And they run into the library, and all of a sudden they hit this wall of sheer rage. And it turns out the library is connected to Candoron in a very profound way that means it can feel the pain that she experienced, and potentially the grief of her loss as well. It just writes back when he asks a couple times, we need to get to Candoron's lair. Eventually it just writes back, hurts, which broke my heart. That was hard. Just, ugh. And eventually a page rips itself out, but it doesn't do it in a neat line. It's like ripping, like, just haphazardly, and it folds itself into a golem, but it's like badly done, and it's just barely able to perform this task for him. And I feel like if it weren't directly related to Kandaron, the library would have told you to go fuck himself. I think it's merely his being some connected to her, and it being connected to her, and the feeling of them sort of almost being on the same side is the only thing that got him what he wanted here. So let's see. The flagstone flew up from below, corkscrewing drunkenly in the air, and it turns into this platform which descends. And they reach her area, and he is almost hoping she's going to be there, which I get. And on the way down, there's a bit of a conversation between him and Sabe about how the index is linked to her. And he says, I think it might be based on Lich Demean's enchantments and theory. I don't think it was a proper attempt to become a lich, though. It's almost like a mental prosthesis for Kandaron, one that extends her mind beyond what was possible before, which is like really interesting considering this sphere. Is that what's going on? That she has left some part of her mentality behind? And when they get there, I also like this, that her lair looks just like it did when she left. And he's sort of resentful that it isn't like broken. It doesn't look like somebody ransacked the place, which is it's so funny, but we really do this. Like, if you suffer some horrific catastrophe and you look up and see other people just going about their days, or you even have to go about your day like it didn't happen, you still have got to grocery shop. You still have got to pay your electric bill. You still have to fill your tank with gas and go to work. It's like insulting. It feels disrespectful. The world should come to a respectful stop for a duration and allow you to pause in time until you are prepared to continue living. It just should. And it doesn't. And it's very disrespectful. And similarly, going to the home of somebody and especially if a person died suddenly, they have perhaps something marinating in the refrigerator, dirty dishes in the sink they were going to get to later, and it's all just as it had been because they were living. And it feels mean-spirited to have this to remind you how alive they were just a moment ago. So that just sort of, I really liked that detail that it was mentioned. So here comes this moment. You guys, this is so, I'm going to tell you guys a couple of, so, I hesitate to even say this. Occasionally I'll get somebody who listens to my show and they'll be like, you have such good insights and you pay such close attention and you really spot things, and sometimes it's hard because you don't get tricked into the moment of surprise. And then there's moments like this where it's fucking said and I'm not getting what it means at all until it's explicitly said to me out loud. And this isn't the only point in these 4 chapters this happens, but it's the first one, so I'm going to just address this. He reaches out with his affinity to push magic into the controls. His magic seemed to slip loose of his grip somehow. His mana poured out of his reservoir, but rather than flowing into the enchantment, it just dissolved into the ether. Hugh tried again, then a third time. On the fourth attempt, he managed to make it flow into the enchantment, and a smaller dais drifted over toward their own. When the two smoothly came to a stop just inches away from each other, Hugh and Sabe stepped across. And his magic took even longer to work this time, but Hugh didn't say anything to Sabe, and finally the bookshelves rose out of the crystal platform. He just idly stared at one of the shelves as Sabe browsed for what she was looking for. Y'all, his magic is going. It's right there. It's in front of my face. Tell me how I thought this was just a result of grief and trauma. I did not for a moment clock the fact that he is a warlock bound to a being that is essentially dead, and now he hasn't got a focus for his magic anymore. It's not until later, when Sabe's grandmother says, "Is your magic working?" and he shakes his head, I straight up went, "Wait, what?" and had to rewind and still wasn't getting it. And I took his word for it, but it wasn't until the reread that I put together this moment is what is warning us that's already happening. But I didn't get it. I just thought either that it was grief and trauma that was causing his magic to just not be focused because he is a wreck, or that Candaron had some sort of like protection built into the controls in her room, and that eventually he is able to sort of like break past that. Like the way that the magic slipped loose of his grip, I was taking as a description of a almost security measure. The way that like the shard made you forget what you were about to do as soon as you step forward to destroy it, that it was like just sheds the magic so that it can't connect unless you are Candaron herself or connected enough, and that he had to like kind of try a couple times for it to be convinced that he had the right to make it work. I went very far in my little like moment of what does this mean in a whole other direction, and completely invented like a whole thing that wasn't happening to explain something that I really should have understood right away. And it didn't even occur to me that because Candaron is now gone, he doesn't have a contracted partner for magic. Y'all, I truly thought if she died, it would just stay. She didn't break the contract. So even though she's gone, the contract remains, and thus we still have our bond. Why didn't I think of this? I just straight up didn't. And then the fact that like he's got the spell book. If you had asked me, I probably would have guessed that he could somehow contract with his spell book, which I is contracted to him already. I'm pretty sure. So it's not even like, you know what I'm saying? I just look. I'm not always worthy of a compliment on how much I understand and have insight. Just sometimes it's like this. So, we go to chapter 2, and Sabe is starting to realize that people are finding out that Candaron is dead, and there's a lot more panicking happening. And this is when Talia meets up with them. And Sabe is trying to tell Talia that she needs to pack and they need to get going ASAP. And Talia is not understanding what she's being told because, you know, they're having to drop it on her here that Alestin betrayed them and she doesn't want to believe it. And then they have to go and find Godric. And he is like, you know, almost catatonic with grief. He just lost his dad, like, what, an hour ago? If that? And they're trying to get him moving and packing as well. Like, Save didn't let herself relax until her friends were all safely inside Hugh's hidden lair with the door locked, wards all activated, and mackerel blocking scrying. So this is when they have a sort of weird argument, Hugh and Godric, about who's like allowed to grieve. And eventually, Godric says something about how he can be selfish and take time to mope later. And Hugh was like, one, selfish? No. Two, moping and grieving are not the same thing. And three, Canderon's not dead, so I don't need to be in mourning. And Sabe is like, y'all, both of you stop it. You're doing some sort of, oh, you have it worse than me competition, which is pointless. And not only pointless and not really helpful, but also not relevant at the moment because we have bigger fish to fry. So we need to think of a plan. I give it even odds that either we get blamed for Alustin's actions or that some faction tries to seize us as pawns in the upcoming power struggle. And Sabe describes Canderon as out of the picture, which is as close as I feel like I get to what I want for how people talk about this situation. And she explains, like, yeah, the mountain doesn't have a leader. Everybody's going to be trying to get in a position where they can run Skyhold, and we do not want to be caught in the middle of that. Plus, we want to track Alustin down, so we don't need to be caught anywhere that stymies our movement. Like, we need to be able to slip in and out when we need to. And Godric says, why don't we want him to destroy Havath the way that he plans? And Sabe has to remind him that the Tongue Eater isn't like controllable. So it could just go rampant. And Godric says, this is Alustin. He always knows what he's doing. I can't imagine he'd do something that dangerous if it were a real risk. And this is the danger of like growing close to a person, because when it's a person like Alustin, even after this terrible betrayal, Godric is still over here willing to give him the benefit of the doubt in a way that's like not, it's understandable, but because the game has so completely shifted and so suddenly, Godric's understanding of who Alustin is hasn't shifted with it. He isn't there yet. And Sabe has to be like, dude, he nearly killed Hugh. I never thought he would do that. But I saw the kid go down and almost die. So who the fuck knows what he would be willing to do? And Sabe reminds them all, too, not to tell her grandmother about the Tongue Eater, that we're going to talk about it being a contagion, but it's not safe for us to talk about what's really going on. Then Talia asks her, okay, you went to get a book before you came to find me and Godric, so I don't think I'm out of line to say what the fuck book is worth more than the two of us. And she's not even saying it accusingly. She's just like, you keep putting me off, but I want to know. And they have the discussion here about great powers and the danger coming from their own people. Even Godric just says, like, oh, great powers always fall to other great powers. He repeats the same thing that everybody has been taught to believe in a really nice, like, example of how deep this propaganda has gone. And she has to convince them how this, like, the dangers of this book and the way that perhaps there would be a pretty big shift against great powers if people began to realize that just positioning themselves well, or maybe even numbers, could do what they thought was impossible. So look at the great powers that have lasted a truly long time. My family has carefully separated ourselves from the day-to-day rule of Rasandis and periodically appoint the most talented and diligent bureaucrat we can find as the Prince of Rasandis just to insulate ourselves from direct rule. Candoron worked almost solely through the Skyhold Council and ate only prey she killed herself, and that she kept buried deep below the sand where no one could poison it. And that was a really good point. And I like the idea of what Sabe is describing, like having somebody that's like a representative of the family, but not the family themselves. And everybody like knows that it's the family that's really in charge, but they aren't going to be the object of, like, they just wouldn't be targets the same way. So Talia is like, oh, well, is this how you plan to bring the great powers down then? Are you just going to like make copies of this and circulate them so that everybody knows about it? And Sabe is like, no, oh my God. Which was like, honestly, Talia's solution isn't terrible. I don't hate it. It just is not what I was thinking. I hadn't considered it. And clearly Sabe hadn't either. And she is like, look, Candoron has been sitting on this copy, and she never did anything with it. I'm not going to try and pretend that I'm smarter than Candoron was about how to use this. So I'm just going to fucking chill for a bit, which I think shows great wisdom. And then we have this, like, moment where Godric starts to blame himself for his father's death, saying that if he weren't here or if he had been stronger, maybe his dad wouldn't have died. And Talia is like, dude, do you really think even if you hadn't been in the mountain and he wasn't worried about protecting you, if we had been there, he still would have let Heliothorax attack it? Or let's say we weren't there. You think he would have just let it be attacked when there's a bunch of, like, you know, people who can't defend themselves in there? He would have done this either way. And I think that's true. But I understand very much where Godric's coming from. In the end, Talia says, it's his sacrifice, not yours. Don't cheapen it by trying to pretend it was a failing on your part or trying to blame yourself. And he says sorry, but I just, man, I really, you guys, Godric's whole situation sucks so bad. So, at this point, Godric is like, my dad used to write me a letter every time he would go to battle. And it would be in case he didn't come back again. And I want to go and find the letter. So they head to Arthur Wallbreaker's quarters. And it's been ransacked. This is really a bummer. The stone furniture had been broken into bits, the cushions cut to shreds. Great pits had been ripped into the walls, and Archer's treasured kitchenware lay scattered about. It was obvious what had happened. Ambitious mages, here in Skyhold, had torn Archer's space apart, searching for any clues to his fabled armor magic now that he was dead. They hadn't even given the spined armor mountain that marked his grave time to cool. Godric wandered around the room in a daze, which slowly turned into a frantic search. Archer's letter to him was nowhere to be found. And here goes the second one, guys. The second of the moments where I felt like a real dodo bird. Kiddos, allow me to introduce you to Natasha. Thinks Archer just maybe didn't leave Godric a letter this time because he was so sure he was coming back from this battle. Now, the room has been ransacked, Natasha. Yes, I don't see the relevance. I'm sorry, it was clear Archer just didn't write a letter, and Godric is angry because his father always did it except for this one time, and how fate has cheated him. Yeah, no, that makes a lot more sense than that somebody who ransacked the room took it. It's definitely more likely that Arthur, who is known by Godric to always write this every time, just didn't do it this time. Just broke with tradition that has been maintained for years. That's more likely than that the people who stole it. My friends, my loved ones, let us gather here today to celebrate what's left of Natasha's intellect, because that shit is sliding away. I can't believe how long it took me to understand it was gone because it was taken, that it did exist. I am not, there's no defense, there's no bit of this that makes sense. It is purely me thinking like, tragic ending. He doesn't get the last words from his father, that he thinks would have brought him closure. It's simply a cruel twist of fate that caused Archer to not do it this time. I don't even know. So I just really have to put myself on Front Street for that one, because I was so embarrassed once I understood what was really going on. It was just a series of embarrassing moments for me in these chapters, truly. So yeah, Godric really loses it, screams and busts a hole in the wall and like starts crying. And seeing Godric not only losing control in this scene, but just like the sense of simmering anger that we have been getting from him at himself, at others. The way that people deal with grief is so different, and blaming himself would definitely be a thing I would see coming for Godric. But rage is a kind of, we didn't see rage from Godric a lot. And I'm kind of worried about how he will handle that when he isn't himself in a lot of ways. Because anger is a really comforting, easy emotion. It's a really nice fallback from letting yourself feel hurt or confused or simply sad. Anger feels so much stronger. And I don't mean stronger like the feeling itself is stronger. I mean, anger can feel like it's giving you a sense of purpose, a sense of strength. Like it's bolstering you. Whereas a lot of those other feelings can really feel like they've just, your kneecaps have got knocked out from under you. So it's understandable why so many of us, when we are feeling a variety of really strong emotions, wind up sort of like zeroing in on the anger and letting that take the forefront and sort of drive things, because it is like gives you an illusion of control somehow. And I am just worried about that with Godric. With Hugh, he has, as we have seen, retreating into himself. And I feel like the fact that nobody else really seems to believe that she's still alive, that Candoron's like somehow in this sphere or who knows what, is only going to cause him to like pull away even more. And I'm really concerned about that for him. So this is when we go to Alustin's POV. And he is going to Sidapsin, which is the city that is ruled by the Gorgons. And Karna Scythe is the queen. And Karna Scythe is a really wild character. Like, really cool sounding. So she's enormous. And she doesn't have regular snakes in, like, coming out of her scalp. She got Hydra eggs and got those implanted in her head. And because of the like symbiotic relationship between Gorgons and the snakes they choose, the fact that she was already this particular creature, which I'll get to in a second, like a much stronger version than most Gorgons, and bonded to an incredibly strong and adaptable animal like a Hydra, has caused her to be a bit of an unbreakable, like, there's a point where he describes having seen her run through the hull of a ship and out the other side without slowing down. Like a kind of imperviousness that I can't even quite wrap my head around. Like she's a missile. You know, it's just, she's really something. But I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit here because he is thinking about things before he actually gets to meet her. And he has his labyrinth stone. It says he should be just as immune to scrying as Mackerel was. There were nations that would go to war for the knowledge of how to use a labyrinth stone like this, or that it was even possible to do so. Hugh had no idea how valuable his spellbook really was. And I am really surprised to find out that this isn't more common knowledge. I didn't appreciate that as well, or as much as, I mean, even at the end of the last book, I think that Sabe's grandmother is thinking something about how like difficult his book is and how incredibly powerful it is, like much more so than anybody would expect for a wizard at his level, a mage. And she herself, as somebody who is particularly good at like locating people, is like almost completely unable to, and kind of just has to guess a lot of the time. So we had that, but here with him using this labyrinth stone in the same way, I just thought it was really surprising that more people don't know about this, that it's not simply everybody knows that you can do this, but labyrinth stones are really rare. It's that it's a use of a stone that folks aren't familiar with at all in a lot of senses. Um, so he is looking at like the stuff in his storage tattoo, and and when I say looking, I mean like mentally, because he's not opening it and going through stuff. Um, the chitin wand rested in a padded crate on one of the shelves. For such an ancient, powerful magical artifact, it was incredibly delicate. It was frankly shocking that the Labyrinth Builder artifact had survived who knew how many eons to the present day. The Labyrinth Builders had vanished far before humanity had even been born. Did we know that was what this wand did? I don't remember if it's like told to us what he's, I feel like maybe it's mentioned that he stole a wand, but we didn't know what it did. I don't know. But the fact that it's related to the building of the labyrinths, I'm really interested in. And he tried not to shift his attention to the back of his storage tattoos warehouse to where the tongue eater waited. He failed. The book twitched and rustled as though dreaming, and Alustin could faintly hear it murmuring words. He felt the urge to listen closer, to open the book so he could hear better. With a shudder, Alustin forced his attention away from the book. Trustworthy histories of the tongue-eater were rare, but even the false histories that had been seeded by Candor and Heliothrax and other victorious enemies all agreed opening the book was both addictive and harmful to one's sanity over time. And yikes, addictive. How does that work? Why would you want to keep opening it? What do you think you're getting out of it? Does it feel good? Like, I'm really, really curious about that. Not for the first time, Alustin considered not using the tongue eater and just relying on the wand. It would more than do the job of gutting Havath City as it ruptured Havath's massive labyrinth and forced it into Anastas proper. That, in combination with the Coven's scheming, would absolutely be enough to end the Dominion. Even if that weren't far too easy of a death for the Havathi Dominion, however, it wouldn't be nearly enough to end the ambitions of their patrons for good. Nor would it achieve Alustin's ancillary objectives, and Alustin would settle for nothing less, no matter what it cost him. So, Alustin is aware that what he is doing is very risky and not entirely necessary to the defeat of the Havathi. but he wants all Havathi to be, and he's calling them sort of patrons here, but he wants them all taken out of the equation as a race. He is doing, like, I don't want to use the word ethnic cleansing because I'm not sure if you would call this an ethnicity, but it is certainly a painting absolutely every Havathi with the same brush, which I'm not sure how fair that is. It's unclear, like how much I'm supposed to really take his word for things. I have to assume he is just not somebody whose word we want to rely on. But yeah, the fact that he's sort of going, well, gotta crack a few eggs to completely rid the world of all Havathi, and maybe those eggs are the rest of humanity's sanity, that's unbalanced. You are in a bad place, Celestin. This is not a headspace to be in when you're working with, like, objects of this power level. It's just unwise. It's the equivalent of driving drunk. Like, you don't need to have access to items of this kind of power when your judgment is so impaired. And it should all be handed over to somebody else. That's what I'm thinking, is like, this needs to be taken out of his hands in the most literal but also figurative way possible. Oh my gosh, so many people are chatting, and I'm so sorry I missed the chat, guys. Dan says, gotta take in context, they're like an hour after a war, no one's at their most rational. Oh, about Candoron, fair. Emmett Shard says he's still an incredibly important person when they've just lost several of the other significant adults in their life all at once. I just want to give them all hugs. Oh my god, Dan is saying with my not grasping things, I blame it on you having to watch anime, it's rotting your brain. MX Shard says, seeing Godric get angry was so sad for me. If I recall, we've never seen him really mad until now. Yeah, that was, like, I love all the ways Beerus combines magic in his world, and Karna is a great example. Dan says, I think this was the first time we learned what the wand was. He might need a bit of therapy. Yeah, he needs to be put somewhere away from folks for a little while to just work through some stuff on his own. Maybe some scream therapy, I don't know. But supervision, I think, is the order of the day. So, and here, Alustin would have to open it to break it after, well, there wasn't going to be an after. Even if there were some way to shield himself from the tongue eater rupturing, which there wasn't much chance of surviving the enemies he'd make with his actions. And it's really something that he would just be also willing to put himself on the line. This is like a suicide bombing. He's going in there knowing this is the end of the line for me. Once I do this, that's it. It's a wrap. And he's still very willing. So, he goes to see Karna, who doesn't have any guards because she does not need them. And the throne that she sits on is called the Vendetta Throne, which is amazing. A blocky monolith covered in carved scenes of violence, made of a single block of some polished, dull red stone Alustin didn't recognize, which said a lot, because Alustin had spent a great many hours learning types of stone from Arthur for the purpose of fighting stone mages. And again, a moment of just like, Arthur, but I'm kind of glad he's dead, so he didn't see me doing this. And this isn't like a universally correct thing, but if you have somebody in your life that you really respect, and you're glad that they're not seeing you doing a thing, I feel like that's pretty much gonna dictate whether or not your thing you're doing is a thing you should be doing. Like, if and I say this specifically, like, somebody that you respect and trust their judgment, because there are plenty of things that you may know somebody you like and care about wouldn't approve of, but that doesn't make them inherently a wrong thing. It's just that person wouldn't specifically approve. Like, Owen's grandmother does not approve of tattoos. Getting a tattoo isn't wrong because of that. He just doesn't want to deal with her talking or judging about it, so he just doesn't let her know. But this is about the morality of a thing. And knowing, like, there is a man who was kind and fierce and loyal and loving, and he would have been furious with me. Yeah, yeah, maybe you should just think about that. But no. Nope. Karna was what was known as a Gorgon juggernaut, a relic from the ancient draconic flesh molding programs. The Dragon Empire had transplanted their own flesh into humans to grow the Gorgons, a species of soldiers to enforce their will on the ground. The Juggernauts had been an attempt to take things even farther, to create unstoppable shock troops. They were rare, but a handful were born every generation, though most died of disease in childhood. Those that survived to adulthood were impossibly strong and fast, able to throw a boulder as far as a catapult, run faster than a horse, and rip through sand ships with their bare hands. Nothing short of a ballista bolt could even penetrate their scales. And she's got the hydras, I love this, each of which divided into more and more heads as they cascaded down her back, which I can't even picture that. That sounds bananas. I truly can't. And especially because we're so used to, like, the way that hair on human beings works is usually at the root we've got the most, and then our hair length short, like, our hair sort of like thins out toward the ends and layers, so that once our hair falls to our shoulders or our back, not all of our hair reaches that point, so it doesn't look thicker at the bottom than at the top almost ever. And to have hair that does the opposite, where there's like kind of more of it in a way at the bottom, and I know it's not hair, but you know what I'm saying, it just sounds crazy. A few decades ago, a Gorgon with a Gorgon affinity had tried to mimic Heliothrax's path to physical power, modifying himself until he could survive a direct hit from siege magic, and tried to seize the throne. The queen had beaten him to a pulp with his own arm, which is just not fair. And she has an earthquake affinity, which just honestly, what do you need that for? Like, nature just overdid it, is what I'm saying. So the thing with this is that Havath used to be a Helicotan ally, and he is hoping that even though he betrayed Kandaron, they are still going to be on his side because of him being Helicotan and their old alliance. And she doesn't really care for the whole coven thing that Kandaron had going on. So he tells her, I killed her myself. Explain. Alustin smiled grimly and set to recruiting the first great power to his cause. He had the weapons to destroy Havath. Now he just needed an army to deliver them. And then we go to chapter 4. And this is when Ilenia Candace arrives. And I really want a count from the beginning of the books to now of how many times Ilenia Candace rolls her eyes. Because it low-key feels like all she does. Everybody she deals with is just frustrating and tiresome. All of them are like drama queens or making jokes that she doesn't want to deal with or whatever. This bitch rolls her eyes so much. And honestly, just get over it, lady. Just get over the fact that everybody around you is annoying and stupid, because that's life. I don't want this eye rolling anymore. It's unprofessional. Stop it. But before she gets there, there's an interesting bit with Talia, like, kind of handling people's dreams, and she's trying to be really respectful of their grief and not take away nightmares related to their grief, only nightmares related to, like, sort of more abstract ideas of, death or fear or harm. But when it comes to like people that they cared about, she's not trying to mess with that. And Mackerel's dreams, there was no color, no light in his dreams. Mackerel lived in a world of surfaces, twists, and bends, where the number of holes or angles in an object mattered more than its size and shape. It was as if Mackerel perceived the universe via pure topology. Trying to make sense of the scene in the spellbook's dreams was exhausting and headache inducing. This is so fascinating to me. It reminds me of like the concept of a two-dimensional world, you know? Um, I can't even really like wrap my head around that. But let's see. Talia didn't even consider trying to get to sleep after that. She just went to the window and watched the sun slowly set. And this is when Ilinia Candace arrives. And she's like tossing up a lot of dust and whatnot. And we find out that because of how much sand got turned into glass, there's a lot of like glass dust in the air. So it's going to be years before it's safe to breathe outside of Skyhold again, which is pretty rough, you guys. Like, I don't know how far that stretches, but everybody, like, there are so many ships and ports and whatnot out that we were relying on, and now is what, are they gonna have to like wear masks when they come? Or, I guess there's a spell perhaps that they could put up to like shield people from it, but that just feels like, almost like Fallout, and seemed really inconvenient. So Save's grandmother didn't head straight for the window, of course. She stopped for a few minutes to speak with Indris, though Talia suspected that had just been a formality. And Talia manages to hide Davrigam's Census, the book that she went to get, in her tattoo at this point. So she comes in and says, "Wow, you guys have made a mess of things." And they're like, "What the fuck?" And she explains that going into hiding has made a lot of people think that they have they joined up with Alustin and are also traitors, and so they're hiding. Clan Castus is causing an uproar, threatening to burn the mountain down if Talia isn't found. Don't worry about it too much. I'll spread the word that I was the one to spirit you away. And what do you mean convinced we absconded with Alustin? How did news about his betrayal get out? And she's like, "Oh, I've been telling literally everybody." And they're like, "Well, what the fuck?" And she says, "You don't want him to get fucking allies, man. So just tell everybody what a two-faced little bitch he is, and nobody's gonna want to mess with this asshole. So yeah, I'm gonna ruin his reputation. So deal with it. It's fine." Um, and have you had any luck looking for him? I don't know how, but he's managed to mimic this book here's anti-scrying field. I don't know anything else that can block my scrying so effectively. I couldn't even find a dead zone where my winds can't penetrate. And let's see. Oh, here it is. He seems to have split off from his traitor librarians, Errant, and I managed to find him. They're in Sidapson, and I'm sure Alestin's not far. Met with the Gorgon Queen, I would imagine. And she explains about there being an ally. They were forward-thinking. Not much chance they would risk conquest by Havath, but she would send troops, and she fought herself against the Havath during their wars. Only reason she didn't come to Helicote's aid was that she thought it was a foolish lost cause. And she says, "I'm not really sure. Like, the only reason he'd be there is to raise an army, but if he's just planning to spread a disease around, you don't really need an army to do that. I mean, it might make it faster, but it is sort of a weird thing. So I'm just going to watch that space and see what happens, but it's not really lining up for me." And let's see, she says, he builds a huge sail out of paper with pockets folded into it for mages to rest in, and then has wind, gravity, and force mages propel it. It can significantly speed up a group of flying mages. That, mixed with the wind current, is more than enough to get him to Sidapsin in a day. Telling you a lot about how powerful his anti-scrying trick is, that he could evade my winds while I was specifically looking for him and one of his sky sails. And this is when Hugh says, "So that's it then? Alustin's out of your reach, so you're just going to stand around and praise his spellcraft?" And I was like, "Sir, what? What? It's so profoundly unreasonable." Thankfully, Elenia just looks at him and goes, "Do you really think that's all I'm doing? Like, just for real?" And he doesn't look at her. He doesn't look up. Eventually, he just shakes his head. And that's the end of that. But it was a real moment of him being, like, really mad at her in a way I felt wasn't warranted, but also her being so sort of casual in this whole exchange, I think is pissing him off, you know? He's, like, wrecked. And she's in here sort of cracking jokes, drinking out of her flask, and it's just this whole... I don't know. It just felt like I could understand him being frustrated, you know? The only, like, serious moment is her saying, "Godric, I'm sorry about your dad. He was a good man." And that's kind of the only real acknowledgement we get. And this is the part where she asks, "Is your magic still working?" And he says no. "You need to accept that Canderun is dead and move on. You can indulge your grief later. For now, you need to move on and start thinking of the future and finding a new partner. Indris owes you a favor. Maybe think about trading that to pact with her on terms more favorable to you than her usual contract. I'll let you know when it's safe to come out of here." And Hugh just starts crying when she leaves. And I just felt like, again, just being like, you need to, acknowledge she's dead and move on. But you don't know either, girl. I get it. Just saying, maybe, treat it for now as if she is dead, just for the sake of your magic, might be a little bit more of a generous and compassionate way to handle things. But that is not something Elenia gives a shit about. So, that is the end of chapter 4. And it is just I feel so bad for Hugh here. And I get what she's saying about Indris, which, like, probably is a really good way to go. You couldn't ask for somebody more advantageously positioned to pack with at this point. But I'm not sure, even with her owing him a favor, that's something that she would agree to. I don't know. We'll have to see. So, okay, guys, I am going to have to go, but I'm really excited to be back in this universe again. It was a long wait, but we're finally here, baby. So, thank you again so much to Dan for commissioning this. Appreciate everybody coming to hang out with me, and until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.